We're on DAF Chaf Aleph Amid Aleph. We were learning yesterday about the Asiris Ha'efa, the 10th of the Efa that is offered by the Kohen Gadol on a daily basis. He offers a korban mincha. It has a 10th of an Efa of flour, and he divides it half in the morning and half in the afternoon. He brings two separate menachos. We also learned in the Mishnah that in the event of the death of the Kohen Gadol, the Asiris Ha'efa korban has to continue in his absence, and there was a machlokes as to whether the party responsible for paying for that is the heirs of the deceased Kohen Gadol, or if it's the Trumas Halishka, the community funds. But everyone agrees that in the absence of the Kohen Gadol, you don't divide the Asiris Ha'efa into two halves. You bring a full Efa as the korban mincha. The Gemara's question is that there's an ambiguity in that statement. And this is Rabbi Yossi Omer Rabbi Yochanan on the 6th line, boy. Mahu, Shlema b'shachris u'shlema bein ha'arbayim, or Shlema b'shachris u'betela bein ha'arbayim. The question is, are you supposed to bring two full tenth of an Efa offerings, one in the morning and one in the afternoon? Or are you just simply saying that there's still a 10th of an Efa total per day, but that you don't divide it, and you just bring the whole thing in the morning, and you bring nothing in the afternoon? That's the question. Now, kad tehei pshitale, dichsiv minchas tamid, perhaps you'll argue that based on the language of the pasuk that says that it has to be eternally the same, then you might argue that it has to always be brought in the morning and always be brought in the afternoon, meaning that there has to be a continuity without stop, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. And then, if you're going to base it on that pasuk to say that they have to bring a full Efa, Asiris Ha'efa in the morning, and a full Asiris Ha'efa in the afternoon, then let me ask you another question. Shloshes lugin mahe, Shloshes lugin shachris, or Shloshes lugin bein ha'arbayim, o lo gumechza shachris, v'lo gumechza bein ha'arbayim. Now the Kohen Gadol has to bring, in addition to the 10th of an Efa that he divides in half, he also, together with that mincha, has to bring 3 loaves of oil, which he divides in half. 1.5 loaves of oil for the morning, half asiris, and 1.5 loaves in the afternoon for the other half of an asiris. Now, if you're going to say that he has to, in the Kohen Gadol's absence, there has to be a full Asiris Ha'efa in the morning and a full Asiris Ha'efa in the afternoon, does that mean that they now have to bring 6 loaves, 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon? Or would you argue that the pasuk only told us that the full Asiris Ha'efa has to be brought in the Kohen Gadol's absence, but it doesn't say anything about the accompanying oil? So perhaps the accompanying oil still only has to be 3 loaves, and you would be able to cover 1.5 loaves for the full Asiris Ha'efa in the morning, and 1.5 loaves for the full Asiris Ha'efa in the afternoon. Obviously, it's disproportionate to the norm, but maybe that's okay. So, Amar Rabbi Chizkiya, Of Hadat Tzri. You also need to ask the following question. There's a third ingredient that goes into the daily mincha, which is Shnei Komtzin, the 2 fistfuls of frankincense that the Kohen Gadol also brings together with his Asiris Ha'efa and his 3 loaves of oil. He mixes that all together and brings half of it in the morning and half of it in the afternoon. So Mahin, what's their status? Shnei Komsim b'shachris or Shnei Komsim bein ha'arbayim, or Kometz echas b'shachris v'kometz echas bein ha'arbayim. Can, in his absence, do we now have to bring 2 fistfuls in the morning and 2 fistfuls in the afternoon to meet the proportion demands of a full Asiris Ha'efa? Or can we say that no, maybe you only need 2 fistfuls total, and you bring 1 fistful in the morning and 1 fistful in the afternoon? So Amar Rabbi Yosa, Klum lamdu lakometz lomi minchas chote. So the Gemara says, previously in a Gemara, we had derived that the law of frankincense of 2 fistfuls for the Kohen Gadol's mincha was derived from the pasuk of minchas chote. Ma lahalon shnei komtzin, afkan shnei komtzin. Therefore, just like over there, for every mincha there has to be 2 fistfuls, your normal assumption would be that for every mincha there has to be 2 fistfuls. And therefore, if you're going to bring, if you have a full Asiris Ha'efa, then you'd have to bring 2 fistfuls in the morning and 2 fistfuls in the afternoon. But the Gemara then argues, no. Ma taman srichale af hachat srichale. But the Gemara had left off with a question over there by the Minchas Chote. The question was that the Gemara had said, what if I have multiple menachos that I have to bring, and I'm bringing them all in one klishares? Would it be sufficient to have one standard amount of 2 fistfuls of levona for multiple menachos, for multiple measures of flour. Let's say I have to bring several menachos at one time. The Gemara had asked over there, can I dispense with my obligation of levona with 2 fistfuls for all of the menachos? Or does the fistfuls have to be proportionate to the number of menachos that I'm bringing? And there the Gemara did not answer the question, and therefore here we don't have an answer to our question. And in the same vein, Amar Rabbi Chizkiah, Klum lamdu shloshes lugin lo mitamid shel bein ha'arbayim, that we learn the law of the 3 loaves of oil from the law of the daily tamid sacrifice, that the daily tamid sacrifice, which is also brought twice daily, has 3 loaves of oil accompanying it. So mala halan shloshes login, avkan shloshes login. So logic would dictate that if by the daily tamid you need 3 loaves of oil per that amount, so you would need 3 loaves of oil per the total amount. However, no, umataman srichale, afkan srichale. But just like over there, the Gemara had left off with a question, and the question that the Gemara had asked by the korban tamid is as follows. We know that the libations that accompany the tamid animal are supposed to lechatchila be brought together with the animal. If, however, the Kohen neglected to bring the flour and the oil together with the korban tamid, he has to do it later that day or possibly even the following day, depending upon when he remembers. The halacha, the question that the Gemara had asked was, what if he forgets to bring the libations with the morning tamid and he only remembers in the afternoon? So then he has to bring 2 measures of flour for the afternoon tamid. The Gemara there too had asked, how much oil? Does he need now 3 loaves of oil? Does he need 6 loaves? And the Gemara didn't answer it. So therefore, just like the Gemara did not answer its questions both by the Minchas Chote and by the Korban Tamid, we also don't have a clear answer as to the proportions of frankincense and oil in a case where you're doubling the shear of the Kohen Gadol's daily offering. So that Gemara says we're going to leave as an ibaya delo ifshita. It's a question that remains unanswered, unresolved. And then we go on to the next part of the Mishnah, Shelo yihi yechulei. The Mishnah had said that there was a Tanai Beistin, that the Chazal had instituted a rule that if a Kohen Gadol uses the afer of the para, among other things that we had listed in the Mishnah, like the wood and the salt in the temple, if he uses it for personal use, he's not liable for me'ilah, he's not violated temple property. So, Reb Shimon bar Nachman b'shem Reb Yonasan, b'din haya sheyimalu ba, v'hein gazur shelo yimalu ba. From the language of the Mishnah, it's clear that really midioraisa, it is subject to me'ilah, and based in place some kind of conditional status to this afer, that it loses its kedusha status if a Kohen uses it for personal use. So it's mashma from our Mishnah that this is all rabbinic, but really midioraisa, the afer of the para, is subject to me'ilah. But that contradicts the following brisa: V'hatani chatas malamed shemolin ba moilin vein molin be'efara. There's a brisa that says that a live para aduma is subject to me'ilah based upon the pasuk, and the word ba is used in the pasuk, which is an exclusionary clause to teach that only the living para aduma is subject to me'ilah, but once it's processed into ash, it is no longer subject to me'ilah. So how can you tell me that this is a rabbinic assignment of the ashes not being subject to me'ilah when we learn in the brisa that it's midioraisa that it's not subject to me'ilah? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Avahu barishona hayu mishtak shekin ba v'nosnin osa al gabi makosehen the gazru sheyimalu ba keven she nigderu gazru shelo yimalu ba. Answers the Gemara that there's a historical continuum that's taking place in the Mishnah. Originally, midioraisa, there is no subjectivity to me'ilah for the ashes of the paraduma. The Chachamim then noted that Kohanim were starting to use the ash for personal use because they thought that it had certain magical curative powers, and it's ash because that's normally used anyway to place as a salve to place on a wound in ancient times. So the Kohanim were taking it. This is precious, this is priceless ash. It's not so easy to manufacture the paraduma. So the Chachamim then instituted a decree that midrabbanan it is subject to me'ilah. But later they saw that that was a tikkun that brought to a kilkul. Why? Because once the Kohanim saw that it was subject to me'ilah, they stopped using the ash on all cases of safek, because they figured if a person is a safek tumas meis and he's really not tameh, then I'm using the ashes for an illegitimate purpose and I'll be liable for me'ilah. So they were overly cautious, which led to a negative outcome, and so therefore the Chachamim decided to remove the original takana that they made, and they made a secondary takana to remove the primary takana, and restored it back to its Torah status of not being subject to me'ilah.
What hana would he have if it's a suffix?
Well, I guess either the Kohen or the person receiving the ash thought that this was problematic. Maybe the Kohen didn't want to deal with it. He said, "No, look, it's me'ilah stuff. I don't want to deal with it if it's not for a mitzvah purpose."
Like just touching it,
But if it's a rabbanan, don't they automatically we don't have stuff.
How does it say in BAYT and Gedalia Chachma B'Minyan?
Well, we don't know that it was done in a different generation. Maybe it was done just in the course of a few years. We don't know historically exactly what the timetable was. Okay, ve'al hakinin chulei. And then the Mishnah had said that in the event that a woman brings 2 birds to the temple, and then or she gives her money for the birds, and then one of them is found to be defective and unusable for the mizbeach, so we require the vendor to replace the bird. It was a machlokas. One opinion was that we require the lishka to replace the bird, and the other opinion was that we require the vendor to replace the bird. So ha'isha hazos b'mehi miskaperes. So you have to understand that this statement is going back to the first Mishnah of the Perek. The Mishnah had also said that if you find a coin between the kinin pushka and the olas gozali olos pushka, and you're not sure whether this coin was meant for a chatas or for an ola bird, you automatically revert it to an ola bird. So we ask the question, how is this woman supposed to get her kapara if it's being brought as an ola and she needs to bring a chatas? Where is that chatas bird going to come from? How is she going to get her kapara? So we had answered there, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Tanai based in hu ha-mesapik es-sakinin, hu mesapik es-apsulos ve'esa ovdos. So the answer is that the Beis Din made a rule that vendors who supply the Beis HaMikdash with birds have to be responsible for the following 2 things. Either any case of doubt where we find a coin and we're not sure whether it's for a chatas and an ola, we bring it for an ola and the vendor has to bring a replacement bird. And number 2, in our case, in our Mishnah, where the bird is found to be defective, he has to replace the bird. That's the reason why we harkened back to the first Mishnah. Hadron alach perak moshenim. So let's go on to the next Mishnah, the final perak of Masechah Shkolim. Mishnah, Kol Harokin. For a short Maseches, it's got a lot of information, eh? Yeah. So the Mishnah says, Kol Harokin Haninsoim B'Yerushalayim Tahorin Chutz Mishel Shuk HaElyon Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says any saliva, spittle, that's found on the streets of Yerushalayim is Tahor, and therefore there's the spittle of a Zav is an Av HaTumah. And therefore, even if you were just to step on it, your shoe would become tameh, because an av hatum is metame utensils, even clothing. So you have to be very careful if you're speaking to someone who's tameh. If he just spits a little bit out of his mouth while he's speaking, and it hits your garment's going to become tameh. You got to take it to the mikveh.
If it hits your face or your hand,
then I'm not sure whether I think it is metame you. I'm not sure. I don't remember whether the spittle of a zav is metame adam. I don't think it is. I only think that tumas meis is metame adam. But there could be some tumah midirabanan that goes on the hands, like we had learned before. But the bottom line is you have to be very careful with these things. If you find spittle in Yerushalayim, you're allowed to assume it's tahar, except if you find it in the Shuk HaElyon, the upper marketplace. What's special about the upper marketplace, which was a known location in Yerushalayim? We'll see in just a minute. That's according to Rabbi Meir. Well, who knows? Rabbi Yossi Omer Bishar Kol Yemos Hashana Shebeemtza Timeim Shebitzdadim Tahorim Uvishas Haregel Shebeemtza Torim Shebitzdadim Timeim. Rabbi Yossi argues, and he says no, that there are other places where you have to worry about tamei spittle. It depends. During the rest of the year, not during the Shalosh Regalim, the spittle that you find in the middle of the road, since most people during the rest of the year are tamei, then if you step on spittle in the middle of the road, then your kalim will become tamei. However, if you step on spittle on the side of the road where the minority of tahor people are, then you can assume that it's tahor spittle. during the Shalosh Regalim, it's just the opposite. Since the majority of people have been metahir themselves for the Yom Tiv, so spittle that you find in the center of the road comes from the majority of Tahor people, and therefore you're okay. Spittle that you find on the side of the road is from the minority of Tameh people, and then you're going to be considered Tameh. Because the general rule is whoever's in the minority will walk to the side of the road. Kol hakelim hanimsoim b'Yerushalayim derech yirida lebeis hatfila tameim v'derech aliyah tahorim shelo ki yiridasan aliyasan divrei Reb Meir. Now Reb Meir tells us another rule. He says that when it comes to utensils that are found in Yerushalayim, it depends where in Yerushalayim you find them. There's a pathway that leads down to the great mikveh of Yerushalayim, and if you find a utensil there, abandoned utensil there, or lost utensil there, you have to assume that it wasn't yet toivled because it's on its way to the mikveh. So it wasn't yet toivled. But there were two pathways, one going into the mikveh, one going out. It was just like in an amusement park. There's a way to get into the ride and a way to get out, because you don't want to bump it. If you just came out of the mikveh, you want to bump into someone who's still tameh. So if you find it on the pathway going out of the mikveh, so then it's assumed to be tohar. Rabbi Yossi. Now we learned more about this. We had seen a Gemara. I don't remember even where this Gemara was, but we had analyzed the Rabbi Meir's shita previously. We're not going to go into it now. What? We better fix our mikveh, two pathways. Rabbi Yossi Omer Kulan Tahorin Chutz Min Hasal V'Hamagreif V'Hamaritza Hamyuchedes L'Kvaros. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. He says it doesn't matter where you find the utensil, no matter where you find it, you can assume that it's tahor, except if it's a utensil that has a specific utility for taking care of the burial remains. There used to be a custom that you would collect bones of already buried people, and sometimes you would have to use certain utensils. I was just speaking to Simcha Yakubovich on Shabbos. He told me that they found ossuaries, which are small boxes of bones, in Yerushalayim. So apparently there was a practice of harvesting bones, perhaps, and I don't know why, and I don't know what the heter is, because normally we don't permit that. But there are certain utensils that used to be used for this purpose. Those have to be assumed to be tameh. All other utensils can assumed to be tar. Magrefa is a rake. A maritza, we'll see what that is. And a sal is a basket, a special kind of basket. Now, sakin shenimtzeis b'yodalit. We also saw this in Maseches Psachim. You find a knife on the street, but it's a shchita knife. It's a knife that you can tell is specifically for shchita. So then, if you find it on the 14th of Nisan, shochet b'miyad, you can assume that the owner had taken it to the mikveh previously, because you can't take a mikveh on the 14th because it needs herav shemesh. It needs to wait until sunset in order to be used for kudshim. So you can assume that the guy took it to the mikveh, whoever lost it took it to the mikveh on the 13th, and therefore for sure it's tahor, and therefore you could use it right away to shecht your korban pesach. But bishlosha asar shona umatbil. If you find the shchita knife on the 13th, then you have to worry that maybe the guy lost it before he had a chance to take it to mikveh, and therefore you have to toivel it before you can use it on the 14th for your korban pesach. Koifetz bazeh uvazeh shona umatbil. However, if you find a cleaver, which is a larger knife, now sometimes a cleaver can be used for shchita, but sometimes it's also used for hacking at the meat to dismember an animal. Now, in that situation, since it's not clear that this koifetz was meant for shchita, you can't automatically assume that the guy, if you find it on the 14th, that he toiveled it on the 13th. Maybe he was still planning to toivel it because he has another knife that he's going to use for the shchita, the korban pesach, and maybe he was planning to use this cleaver to hack at his korban chagiga that he was going to have tomorrow. So you don't know. And therefore, if you find it on the 14th, you still have to take it to the mikveh before you can use it for tonight or tomorrow.
It's a suffix with the bracha.
Different issue. We don't even know whether the Mishnah holds you have to make a bracha with this, because the bracha was instituted perhaps even at a different time. Chalar ba'as ar lios b'shabes shochet ba'miyad. If, however, the 14th of Nisan is on a Shabbos, then even if you find a kofitz, this cleaver, whose use is ambiguous, you can use it right away, because since you're not allowed to toivel kalim on Shabbos, you can assume the guy toiveled it on the 13th in order to use it for Yantiv. So, b'tes vav shochet b'miyad, if you find the cleaver on the 15th, you can shecht with it immediately, meaning that you can even use it to shecht your kachim with it, because you can assume it was toiveled before. Nimtza kishura l'sakin hareyu kisakin. And finally, if you find the cleaver on the 14th that's tied to a shechita knife, you can assume that just like the shechita knife went to mikvah, since this is tied to it, that the cleaver also went to mikvah. Let's now take a look at the Gemara. Rabbi Abin b'shem Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Katzran shel Nachrim hayasham. We're going back on the statement that Reb Meir holds that the upper marketplace of Yerushalayim is the only place where you'll find tamei spittle that you have to worry about. Why? What's special about that upper marketplace? The Gemara answers that there was a Gentile laundromat in that area, right? Chinese laundry, yeah. The Chinese are everywhere now, so they probably had a Chinese laundromat. It was probably a Roman laundromat. I'm not exactly sure why it was in that particular location, but because there was a concentration of Gentiles, dafka, in that place, Chazal, and we know Chazal were gozer that goyim have a status of tumah zav. So therefore, if you find spittle there, you have to be choshesh that there's tumah. Amar Rabbi Chanina arodos hayunochin b'Yerushalayim. That no, it's not that there was a laundromat there, but rather this was a place where they used to kill wild donkeys, because the Romans used to cultivate lions for their sport. They had the Colosseums, right? So the lions have to eat. When they're not eating Jews, they got to eat something else. If the Jews faster, they got to feed it something else. So they used to find wild donkeys in the wild, and they used to kill them there. And that's why it was a high concentration of non-Jews that were in that location in the Shuk HaElyon. And it also tells us, "V'hayole regola mishtakin b'dam ad arkavosehen ubo lifnei chachamim v'lo amru lahem davar." They would walk, if a Jew walked up to the Shuk HaElyon, not only did he have to worry about spittle, but there was also so much blood there because of all of the blood that was spilled from these donkeys, that Jews would walk up knee-deep in blood, and then when they came to the Chachamim to find out whether they had a problem of being tamei, because we know that there's something called tumas nevela, that when an animal dies not through shechita, its flesh transmits tumah, but we didn't come in contact with the flesh, we only came in contact with some of the splattered blood. Are we tamei or not? And the Chachamim didn't require them to do anything. The Chachamim said, no, you guys are tahor. So now we're going to launch into a discussion of dam nevela, of the blood of a nevela, whether it transmits tumah or not. This is an exact duplicate of a Gemara that we had seen a few blot ago, which had talked about this very same thing, so we'll run through it quickly. Rabbi Simon b'shem Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rabbi Simon had said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi that Maisa b'preida mishal beis Rebbe shemesa v'tiaru es dameha mishum nevela. So the Maisa was like this. There was a donkey that was living in the house of Rebbe, and it died. And apparently it died in such a way that some of its blood spilled out, and someone came in contact with it, and they wanted to know whether that person was tamei. And they paskin that the person is tahor because it's only dam nevela, it's not the flesh of the nevela. So Rabbi Eliezer shala Rabbi Simon. So Rabbi Eliezer, when he hears this story that Rabbi Simon is relating, he asks him, Rabbi Simon, explain to me, ad kama, how much? In other words, is that an unconditional amount? It means that no matter how much blood, it's always tahor, or is it only until a certain amount, and beyond that shear, then it will transmit tumah? So the Gemara says, velo agive. Rabbi Simon blew him off. He just ignored him. Shoyel Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So then, Rebbe Lazar went to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, I guess who was the originator of this story, and asked him, what's the shear? And Omar Lei ad revius tohar yoser mikan tamei. That Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi told him that up until a revius, the blood of a nevela is not metame, but once you have a revius, it's going to be metame.
Is that an amount that you come in contact with?
Yeah, the amount that you come in contact with.
Or the amount that gets on you?
The amount that you come in contact with. It has to come in physical contact, a revius at one time. So if you have a cup full of blood and you touch it, so then you become tamei. It really bothered Rabbi Lazar. Like, why did Rabbi Simon blow me off? And to the point where I had to go to the senior rabbi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. It bothered him. We continue the story that Rav Bibi Hava Yasiv, Masni Hadenuvda. So Rabbi Bibi was also sitting, it seems like at the same time that Rabbi Elazar was asking the question, or maybe at some later time, it's not clear. He was learning this whole halacha. Amarle Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna ad kama. Amarle ad revius tar yosem mikan tamei. So the question that Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna said is asked, again, sitting in front of Rabbi Simon. When he hears this psak from Rabbi Simon, he says to him, Rebbe, Is it only up until a revius that it's tahor, but more than that it's metame? What's the din? Ubat Bey. This time Rabbi Simon kicked the guy for asking the question. So Rabbi Lazar, or now it's Rabbi Zreika says, Amalei Rabbi Zreika began to have a shaylach at BAYT Bey. So Rabbi Zreika says, he asked you a legitimate question. Why are you kicking him?
Touchy issue.
It's a very touchy issue. So Amalei began delo havos daiti bi. So Rabbi Simon was very frustrated, somehow agitated, and I think that this was cumulative. In other words, the other rabbis had seen that Rabbi Simon blew off Rabbi Lazar, but they persisted in asking him the question. So Rabbi Simon said, I don't have Yishuv Hadas. I don't have a settled mind. And you guys should have known that and stopped hocking me a chinik and asking me this question. So Rabbi Simon now explains, why do I have an unsettled mind? Why am I agitated? Why am I stressed out? Because the pasuk, when it gives us the curse of what will happen to a person who doesn't follow Hashem, the first part of the pasuk says, your life will be suspended before you. This is one level of stress, where you won't have farmland, you won't be able to grow your own produce, and you'll have to buy wheat on an annual basis from a wheat vendor. So that's one level of stress, that I don't have my own fields to grow my own wheat. The next level of stress is that you'll be fearful day and night. Why? Because zeshu lokech min hasadaki. That's a person who doesn't have enough money to buy the annual volume of wheat, but he only has small amounts of money at a time, so he has to go and buy from a retailer in smaller increments, buy his wheat on a daily basis. That's an additional level of stress. But the third level of stress is velo samin b'chayecha, you won't believe your life, meaning that it'll be really bad. Zeshu lokech min hapaltor. That's a person who doesn't even have the resources to grind the wheat into flour and bake it into bread himself, because he has no oven, he has no mill, and instead he's going to have to buy baked bread from a bakery. That really is a sign of desperation if a person has no resources of his own. So, va'ana samich apaltira, and Reb Simon says, that's me. I buy baked bread. I got nothing in life. I'm extremely agitated. I got constantly stressed out and worried about where my next meal is coming from. So you should know not to hack me a chinik. Right? Probably that was a sign that it was time for Reb Simon to leave Kollel. If he spent more time on his cell phone outside worrying about his next meal instead of sitting and learning in the Beis Medrash, then that was a sign that it was time to leave. But basically, that's why Reb Simon was so agitated. So my Kedon. So the Gemara says, okay, let's put Rabbi Simon's agitation to the side. What's the bottom line? In other words, what's the halacha as far as the revius dam? Is a revius dam mitame or not? So Heyed Rabbi Yeshua ben Petora al dam nevelo shu tohar. So we have a statement from Rabbi Yeshua ben Pesora that dam of a nevela is unconditionally tohar, which is mashma whether it's a revius or not. So mahu tohar. Tohar milahachshus. The Gemara says that's not a raya, because the word tohar might mean not that it doesn't transmit tumah, but that it doesn't prime objects to be makabel tumah. That's maybe all that it means. Maybe if you just have a small amount and it falls on a food item, maybe that's not enough to prime it to receive tumah in the future. But halitamos mitame. But maybe as far as transmitting tumah, if it's more than a revius, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Pesora was not commenting on. So Taman Tanina, and let's look at another brisa. The brisa says, Dam hasheretz mitame kibisaro, mitame ve'eno machshir, ve'en lanu kayotze bo. So the brisa says that the blood of a sheretz is unique in that its blood is mitame just like its flesh, and it's mitame but does not prime other things to be makabel tuma, and it's unique in this sense. Nothing else is like it. So the Gemara makes a diuk. Ve'en lanu kayotze bo, ve'en lanu kayotze bo. So the Gemara wants to make a diuk as follows. If the blood of a sheretz is unique, that it's not mitame, so then, that it's unique, that it is mitame, so that would imply that the dam of a nevela is not mitame. So let's prove it from here. So the Gemara says, no. Kishir tumaso, aval damo mitame kibisaro. That no, maybe it's unique in the sense that the measurement of blood is the same as the measurement of basar in a sheretz to be mitame. In both cases, it's just a small little adasha, the size of a lentil. But as far as the blood being able to be mitame in other substances like nevela, maybe the brisa was not commenting on. It's just that because the shear of dam by nevela is different from the shear of the basar, dam is a revius, basar is a kazayas, but maybe it's still metame, and that's not what the brisa was referring to. Amar Rabbi Yossi pligi b'trein amoroim. So bottom line is we have a machlokas amoroim whether a revius of nevela blood will be metame or not. Chad amar tame v'chad amar tahor. One says tame, one says tahor. Manda amar tame ke Rabbi Yehuda. There's a Mishnah in Maseches Idios, I think, that cites Rabbi Yehuda that says that it's unconditionally tahor, and Umanda amar tahor ke Rabbi Yeshua ben Pisora, who says it's tame rather, and the Mandar who says that it's tahor is like this testimony of Rabbi Yeshua ben Pisora that we just saw a moment ago, who says that it's unconditionally tahor. Okay, Amar le Rav Avduma demin nechusa, that he says v'yeos. It makes sense to say that Rabbi Yehuda is the one who was mitame the blood if it's larger than a revius. The Rabbi Yehuda moiraina de beinasi Ahava. Rabbi Yehuda was the posek of the house of the Nasi, and since this happened in the house of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and so therefore Rabbi Yehuda ben Eloi was involved in that psak, and therefore when they paskin that the blood was tohor, they only paskin that it was tohor because it was less than a revius. But if it was more than a revius, Rabbi Yehuda paskin that it was tamei. Next, kol harokin v'chulei, all spittle. Now this is going on the shita of Rabbi Meir, who said that all spittle is mutter, is tohor, except for the spittle in the shuka elya. Lo kein amar Rabbi Yevo b'shem Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina lo gazru al harokin shebirushalayim. But it's almost like a self-contradictory statement. First, the statement is that there was never any takana made to be matame the spittle in Yerushalayim whatsoever. And how can you then say in the same breath that in the Shukha Elyon the spittle is tame? The Gemara answers, Ha'itmar alei Rabbi Abba Mishem Rabbi Shua ben Levi Katzun Shal Nachrim Ha'yasham. The answer is that when you know that the circumstances in the Shukha Elyon require you to be machmir, so then you're machmir. In other words, yes, it's true. Chazal saw no reason to be gozer on the spittle of Yerushalayim because the vast majority were Jewish. But if you know that there's one special place in Yerushalayim where there's a concentration of Gentiles, so then you have to be machmir. So now we're going on the statement of Rabbi Yossi that says that you do have to be machmir on spittle in Yerushalayim. It depends upon where you find it in the road and on what time of year. So the Gemara just clarifies, during the rest of the year, people who were tamei would walk in the center of the road. People who were tohor would walk on the side of the road. Now the Gra changes the gears here. I'm going to read it according to the Girsa HaGra. HaTohorin mahalchin, HaTohorin omrim lahen proshu, v'HaTameim mahalchin stam. So during the rest of the year, people who were tohor, since they're in the minority, are walking on the side of the road, and they would tell people, stay away, stay away. And the people who were tamei, they were majority, they walked in the center of the road with impunity and didn't have to worry. B'shas haregel, but during the yamim tovim, the shalosh regalim, hatahorim mahalchin shiboles, v'atmei mahalchin min atzad. Then the people who were tar in the majority, they walked down the center of the road, and the people who were tamei stayed on the side of the street. Hatamein omrim lahem proshu, v'hatahorim mahalchin stam. So the people who were tamei, this is the minority, they would say, stay away from us, we're tamei. And the people in the majority, the Torah people, would walk with impunity without having to worry. Let's go on. That all of the kelim that were found, it depends where you find them in Yerushalayim. If you find them on the pathway going towards the mikveh, they're tamei. But going on the path out of the mikveh or anywhere else, they're tahor. But wait a minute. But wasn't there a statement made in general that there was never a chashash of tamei kelim at all anywhere in Yerushalayim? Gemara says no. That but if you find it in a special place where tamei kelim are taken to go to the mikvah, then you have to assume that they're tamei. Now we talk about those utensils that are used for the exhuming and processing of the remains of the dead. We talked about a sal, a basket. We talked about a magrefa, which is a rake, and we talked about something called a maritza. So, according to Abba Shol, it wasn't called a maritza; it was called a tziporin. So, Manda Omer tziporin shahiyadoma l'tziporin. The reason why he called it a tziporin is because it resembled human fingernails. In other words, apparently it was of some kind of hard substance that looked like fingernails, and it was used to break up the bones. And mandomer meritza shemiritza esa even levesa kvaros. If you learn that it's called a meritza, is because it would break up the stones for the cemetery. There are two ways of learning. One way of learning is that if you had to find a place for burial and there was rocks in the area, so you had to use a chisel to break the rock. Another explanation is that you would use it to pound and pulverize the bone so that you could fit it into the ossuary. Okay, let's go on. Koifetz v'chulei. The koifetz, our Mishnah had said that if you find a koifetz tied to a sakin, you can assume that just like the sakin is Torah on the 14th, the koifetz is as well, the cleaver is as well. But tani hasakin keshura la harezu kamosa. We have a brisa which teaches us just the opposite. The brisa tells us that when a koifetz is tied to the knife, then the knife has to be presumed to be tamei, just like the koifetz is presumed to be tamei. Our Mishnah says the opposite, that just like the knife is presumed tahor, the koifetz is also presumed tahor. So you have a machlokus between the Mishnah and the brisa. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. Paroches shenitmeis bivlad hatuma matbilan osa bifnim umachnisan osa miyad. That if you have the paroches comes in contact with, let's say, liquid that is only tamei midarabanan. So since it's only a tumah derabanan, you can take it straight away to the mikveh that's in the Beis HaMikdash. You don't have to remove it from the temple, and then rehang it right away, even while it's still damp. V'shenit meis ba'av ha'tumah matbilan osa b'chutz v'shotchen osa b'chel mipnei shu tzricha erev shemesh. But if a real tumah d'oraisa comes and is metame this paroches, then you have to remove it from the temple, take it to a mikveh outside the temple, and let it hang in the lattice area that's outside the actual walls of the temple, because it needs to have erev shemesh for the sun to go down before it can be considered to be tahor. Now, im haisa chadasha shotchen osa al gag ha'itzdaba kedei sheyireh ha'ames malachta shehinah. And if it's a new paroches, which means it hasn't faded yet, it's not stained with blood yet, it's still very bright and very new, so then you should hang it on a place called the Itztaba, which is like a higher platform, so that people would come to the Beis HaMikdash and they would see the beautiful handiwork of the paroches. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Mishum Reb Shimon ben Haskan, paroches ovia tefach. He says that the paroches was a very, very thick and heavy curtain. It was one tefach thick. So I'm saying, just imagine, this is a woven piece of fabric that's one tefach wide. It's huge, very heavy. And al shiva mushtayim nimin ne'ereges, it used strings, 72 strings in the weave. So in other words, there was a 72-string weave. If you were setting up a loom, you'd have a loom of 72 strings. Now each string, al kol nima v'nima chaf dalet chutin, each string was comprised of 24 threads. So orcha mem ama, v'rachba chaf ama, that its length was 40 amos, its width was 20 amos. We're talking about a huge piece, a huge curtain.
Two of them.
What?
Two of them.
Wait a minute. You'll see. So 1 second. So first of all, I know what you're referring to. It's a machlokas where there was two or one, but this seems to say that there was only one. Umishmone mushtayim ribo ha'isa. So when you do the math, you'll discover that the number of threads that went into the manufacture of such a large curtain was 820,000 threads. Ushtayim osin b'chol shana. They would manufacture 2 every single year. Now, why would they manufacture 2? So either because you had to replace it every 6 months, or maybe, like you said, there were 2 at the same time. It's not clear. The shalosh meos kohanim atbilanos, it was so heavy, you needed 300 kohanim to pick it up and to take it to the mikveh.
Where would it fit?
It's a good question. The question is, would you be allowed to be toivel it part by part? That's an interesting question also. The Gemara now says, Ilu amar chut echad kaful lishnayim. So when you want to know the type of string that is employed in weaving the paroches, if the Torah would have just said the word chut implies a thread that is plaited, doubled over. Shazur, the word shazur implies lishlosha, 3-plaited thread, and moshzar is lashisha. The Torah uses the word moshzar, which means a 6-plaited thread. So arba, now there are 4 types of thread that are listed in the Torah. Tcheles v'argaman, tolas, shani, v'sheish. So therefore, and it says mashzar, so therefore there's 4 different kinds of 6 plated threads. So therefore there are 24 threads that go into each nim, into each string. That's where you get your 24 that our Mishnah had said, that each nim, each string on the loom, was a 24 plated thread nim. So mikan, Tani shloshim ushtayim. So there's another brisa that disagrees and says that each nim was a 32 thread plated string. Ilu amar chut echad kaful lishnayim. If the Torah would have said the word chut, it would mean a double thread. Shazur la'arba, the word shazur implies a 4-plated thread, and mashzar lishmona, and mashzar implies an 8-plated thread. So arba, and there were 4 different colors of thread, so mikan hatlos nebetrain, 8 times 4 is 32. So Tana, now we have a third brisa which says arba'im u'shmona, that each nim was a 48-plated thread, because ilu amar chut echad kaful lishnayim. If the Torah would have used the word chut, that would have applied a double thread. Kalia lishlosh. If the Torah would have used the word kalia, that would imply a 3-plated thread. And shazur lishisha, the word shazur implies a 6-plated thread, and mashzar lishnei masar, and mashzar implies a 12-plated thread. If there were 4 12-plated threads for each nim, so because of the 4 colors, mikan ha'arboim v'tamanya. So now that turns out that each nim, according to this brisa, was a 48-plated thread. Now, kasav echad omer ma'aseh rokeim, v'kasav echad omer ma'aseh choshev. There are 2 different kinds of tapestry curtains that were in the Mishkan. One was the soreg, which was the opening curtain when you walked into the courtyard of the Mishkan. And the other one was the paroches, to divide between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. By the Soreg, it says that it was Maaseh Rokeim. By the paroches, it says it was Maaseh Choshev. What's the difference between the 2? So Maaseh Rokeim, Partzuf Echad, Maaseh Choshev, Shtei Partzufas. Answers the Gemara that Maaseh Rokeim is not as fancy, because it only had an illustration on one side. But Maaseh Choshev for the paroches means it has an illustration on both sides. Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Menachem Yachad Omer Maaseh Rokeim Ari Mikan V'Ari Mikan Maaseh Choshev Ari Mikan V'Chalak Mikan. Then now we have the Samachlokes. One man Omer says that Maaseh Rokeim means that it has an illustration of a lion on both sides, and Maaseh Choshev means it only has a lion on one side and the other side is blank. V'charana Omer, just the opposite. Maaseh Rokeim Ari Mikan V'Chalak Mikan, Maaseh Choshev Ari Mikan V'Nesher Mikan. He says that no, Maaseh Rokeim, like we said, is less fancy, that it was only a lion on one side and blank on the other side, and Maaseh Choshev is a lion on one side and an eagle on the other side, which was for the paroches. Finally, Bishmonim Ushtayim Ribo Haisanases V'chulei, that if you do the math, it turns out there were 820,000 threads per paroches. But then it also said that it took 300 Kohanim to take it to the mikveh. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bizna b'shem Shmuel Guzma, that the number 300 is an exaggeration. First of all, when you think about it, to get 300 Kohanim together to pick up a curtain is not very practical. So the word number 300 that you find throughout Shas is usually an exaggerative number. And that's what the Gemara wants to clarify. It was lav dafka 300, it was a lot, but probably dozens and not hundreds. And Taman Taninan Pa'amim Haya Aleha Kishlosh Meos Kur, and Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Bon b'Shem Shmuel Guzma. In a similar vein, there's a statement made that the amount of ash that would sometimes accumulate in the center of the Mizbeach was 300 cores of ash. And that too, says the Gemara, is an exaggerative number, because, as remember, we learned just the other day that the space on the Mizbeach for the ash was only 1 amma by 1 amma. So to pile up 300 cores of ash, it would be like a huge, narrow mountain of ash, so that's also an exaggerative number. You have a